One of the experiences I trust every homebrewer shares is the feeling of awe that comes from witnessing the conversion of wort into beer through the fermentation process. Even after 15 years, I still get giddy when I see the first signs of airlock activity, a nice fluffy kreuzen developing on top of my beer. The worst is when this takes too long. You all know the anxiety that comes from checking on a batch a day after pitching and seeing no action. This is why we love Imperial Yeast, who pack 200 billion cells of the purest yeast into each pitch-right pouch, which assures quick starts, healthy fermentation, and predictably great results. I strongly urge all of our listeners to check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and let them know that you appreciate their support of the Brewlosophy podcast while you're at it. All right, on to the show. In this day and age, hops seem to get most of the focus when it comes to brewing ingredients, which is great. They're an amazing plant that allow us to impart myriad aromas and flavors to beer. But even so, I tend to view hops as being sort of like paint that gets applied to a canvas that's made of malt, of which there are many varieties. You're listening to the Brewlosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me to discuss one of the popularly used base malts in brewing, Maris Otter, is fellow contributor Malcolm Fraser.
I like the analogy of hops being almost like a spice, as a lot of brewers say, to the canvas, or the paint to the canvas, and I use the same thing as like the base of our stock of a soup.
Yeah,
and the spice being the hops. It's funny to me. A lot of people, you'll say, "Hey, what is beer made of?" And the first thing they say is hops. It's always the first thing on the top of their mouth.
Yeah,
and then you talk about a beer, and they'll talk about which hops they use, not which malt is used. You know, it's a shame, but hopefully that'll change for the better at some point.
Yeah, I do feel like we're kind of drifting more into, as lager styles get more and more popular, we are kind of drifting into more of a malt-focused perspective when it comes to brewing and beer. Of course, there are other styles that are much more heavily weighted toward the malt character as opposed to the hop character. We're going to be talking about some of those in this show. It wasn't long after I switched from extract to all grain that I learned of Maris Otter specifically, though I have to admit, skeptic as I am, I wasn't necessarily convinced it'd create a beer that was radically different than one made with standard and oftentimes cheaper pale malt. Of course, I've used hundreds, if not thousands of pounds of MO over the years, and while my personal opinions have shifted a little bit based on my own experiences, I'm definitely looking forward to talking with you about some of the more objective aspects of Maris Otter, including the experiment that you did. It's going to be a good one. Hey, listen, if you appreciate what we're doing and would like to help us to continue doing it, please consider becoming a patron over at patreon.com/brewlosophy, where for a pretty small fee, you'll receive rewards like unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with someone neat in the brewing world. Last month, we had Stan Hieronymus. In prior months, we've had John Kimmich from The Alchemist. We've had Vinny Cilurzo from Russian River. And coming up next month is the radical brewer himself, Randy Mosier, lauded author, brewer, and all-around cool guy. All past sessions are available on our private Facebook page, so new members can go back and view those at their leisure. Learn more about being rewarded for your support of us over at patreon.com/brewlosophy. And if you wouldn't mind using the links found at brewlosophy.com/support when you're doing your online shopping, we'd really appreciate that as well. All right, feedback this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who provide brewers with beautiful stainless gear such as their turnkey BH15 pilot brewing system, which has a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Brewers Hardware also has a bunch of unique purpose-built products useful to both professionals and home brewers. Go check them out at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to let them know that you heard about them on the Brewlosophy podcast at checkout to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. All right, so it's no secret that Brewlosophy loves Imperial Yeast, and based on the feedback that we get on a pretty daily basis from followers of the show and website, we're definitely not alone. Unfortunately, there is a good chunk of people out there who have or who don't have access to the amazingness that is Imperial Yeast because of where they live. Now, such was the case for homebrewers in Australia until recently. I just got an email 2-3 weeks ago now from a dude named Philippe Holland, who mentioned that he was soon going to be opening an online homebrew shop based out of Australia that offers Imperial Yeast at very competitive prices. Well, I just got word that Philippe's shop is now up and running, which means all of you Aussies out there can get your hands on what we truly believe to be some of the best yeast on the market. The website is yeastbeast.com.au. Again, that's yeastbeast.com.au. I promise this is not a paid ad. I really just want those of you out there who who don't live in the U.S. who've been contacting me from Australia to know that you now have the opportunity to use this awesome yeast. So go get you some. Again, one more. That's yeastbeast.com.au. Thanks for the info, Philippe. We hope you kick some ass in your new adventure as a shop owner. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com. Leave us a voice message by calling 951-444-0320 or drop us a note on social media. All right, for those of you who don't know, my friend Jersey is a full-time fighter pilot for the California Air National Guard. He flies one of the baddest jets out there, the F-15 Eagle. Well, occasionally his work takes him to faraway places. For example, as those of you who listened to our holiday special learned, he was in Ukraine for a few weeks late last year. Well, a couple weeks back, Jersey took off for another work trip that's going to keep him away from home, his family, and all of us friends, as well as this microphone, for at least 3 months. So to make sure we didn't please the haters too much, the three of us put some work in before Jersey left and reviewed enough beers to take us through his absence. The first of which was a Berliner Weiss that I made with flaked oats instead of wheat.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Jersey, it looks like another sour.
No, it doesn't. When it looks like dish soap, that usually I've seen this many times. I just can't remember what it is.
It looks like something he cleaned glasses with, actually.
My eye feel has it as dish soap.
How's that in your eye? It does smell like a sour.
Like me.
Are you going to do
I'm not going to drink it. I know what it is. It's dish soap.
It is.
You do the beer review.
I believe it is.
Is it a sour?
It is.
Okay, well, then this is right in your wheelhouse. You don't even need me.
It's good.
If it's a sour and you like it, then we know a couple things. One, it's probably one of those Pfefferfleissens or whatever that he always talks about. It's like a... Because we call it sour. He's like, it's not a sour, it's a Superfleifen.
Pfeffernugen.
What is it? It's a type. It's like a Pfefferfleifen. Come on, man.
It's kind of like an Alka-Seltzer.
Oh, dude. It's minimalist. It's like
very minimal. It's like
the Amish version of a sour. It actually kind of tastes like dish soap now that I've got that in my brain.
How about the Alka-Seltzer?
I don't know what Alka-Seltzer tastes like, dude. My body functions. I'm younger than you.
Like cold medicine?
I get a little bit of grape in there. Grape, water, and dish soap.
A lot of water. Dude. It's very minimal.
Edelweiss. God, I'm getting close to the thing that he said. That when we call it a sour, he calls it some fancy German name.
But we don't know.
You know that we know that it is something.
As soon as he says it, we're like, that's it. You could drink the crap out of it, though.
It's growing up. Oh, it's super light. It's like a sour light beer. That's called a Pfefferpfeifen. I give it, dude, I'm not a huge sour. And if I drink sour beer, I like the stronger sours. This is light sour. This is, I give it a light review. I give it 4 jers.
I said 3.
So a total of 42.
He was pretty close. He was damn close with Edelweiss. And I've got to be honest, their description of this beer wasn't terribly far off the mark, in my opinion. You know, at sub 3% ABV, it is sort of light, you know, and seeing as it was a soured with uncrushed grain, it did get a little bit of funkiness to it. I don't know.
So what was that? What was he talking about? Soapy. What was that all about?
Those guys sometimes taste things that I don't get. I didn't get soapy with this beer at all. It does kind of look like, you know, dirty dishwater. I mean, it's a Berliner Weiss.
Oh, come on, man. I don't know. I make Berliners. They're beautiful. They have like a nice light yellow hue, you know, like that almost wit beer like hue.
Yeah,
nice.
but if you're not expecting it and you're used to crystal clear, you know, Coors Lat, you can see why they would think that it kind of looked like a you know, dirty dishwater.
I'm highly offended.
I know you are.
So what is it? Like, he just doesn't like sour beers in general? I mean, Jersey?
No. He, you know, I think they both thought it was decent. This one wasn't very assertively sour. This was the Berliner Weiss that I made with, again, with flaked oats instead of wheat. So it was actually a lot, in my experience, a lot paler than past Berliner Weiss that I've made. And it did add a different character. But it wasn't, you know, I didn't think it was a bad beer. Tim had been drinking it for the last, I don't know, the month prior to that. And he'd kind of enjoyed it. You kind of tell by his review, but.
Yeah. I love those styles, especially during the winter.
Yeah. So
summer.
They're a perfect winter beer. Well, I thought they did a pretty good job nailing it, and it wasn't. Now this isn't like an assertively sour beer. So for them to kind of notice that there was still kind of some acidity going on there, you know, these guys' palates just keep on growing. Well, if you'd like to have your beer or any other fermented beverage reviewed by Jersey and Tim, you can email me, Marshall@brulosophy.com, and we will get you all set up. All right, we're going to be back in a jiff. So I've been hanging out with brewers and craft beer nerds for a long time now, and while we do occasionally have our differences, one thing it seems we all share is a love of learning and trying new things, as well as saving a couple of bucks. Well, right now, Craft Beer and Brewing is helping fans of Brewlosophy learn more while saving some coin by offering 20% off the price of a subscription to their awesome magazine. Chock full of brewing insights, tips, and recipes from industry experts, Craft Beer and Brewing is seriously great. I read every issue page to page myself. To get 20% off your subscription, all you have to do is sign up at beerandbrewing.com/brewlosophy.
Just as the Grainfather all-in-one brewing system revolutionized all-grain brewing at home, the Grainfather conical fermenter and glycol chiller take this one step further by giving homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation, just like commercial breweries use. With a full array of features including insulated double-walled construction, an innovative dual-valve yeast dump and sampling tap, and an integrated heating element and temperature controller, the conical fermenter provides a professional quality fermenting environment for superior temperature control. With the ability to individually power and control the temperature of up to 4 Grainfather conical fermenters, each with their own fermenting schedule, the Grainfather Glycol Chiller is the perfect addition to ensure superior fermenting results. And for a limited time, you can save 10% on your order by going to Grainfather.com and entering coupon code NZB during checkout. Once again, enter coupon code NZB when you order the Grainfather conical fermenter or Glycol Chiller at Grainfather.com. Once again, that's Grainfather.com.
Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the super fast counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. When dumping wort-soaked grain and leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, did you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order. When it comes to base malts, brewers have quite a few options these days, from lighter kiln Pilsner malt to darker malts like Munich. Many of these malts are associated with specific regions, one being Maris Otter, which, as far as I'm aware, is distinctly English in origin.
Yeah, it absolutely is. One of the things people say is like you can just pretty much add Maris Otter and maybe some Fuggles or EKG, and it's pretty much an English beer.
Right.
You know, obviously English yeast helps, but even if you do like a golden ale with American yeast, the Maris Otter malt is distinctly English to a lot of people's impression. And it's not as old as some people think.
Right.
However, it is old as far as longevity and lifespan, because one of the things I learned while researching this for my article was how often these more popular cultivars of malt come and go. Most of them only last a decade or two until various diseases catch up with them, or the agronomics, meaning the ease of growth and the yield and disease resistance, outpace them. So they kind of get outclassed by up-and-coming malts.
Yeah.
So one of the very old malts was I'm probably mispronounce it, Chevalier.
Chevalier.
Yeah, is 1827. So that's or 1824. That's a very old malt, and that begot other cultivars, and so as they got more and more outclassed, etc., due to susceptibility, other malts come along. So with Maris Otter, it came out of the Plant Breeding Institute. I love the British because they're very literal in their naming of things.
Yeah.
What do they do there? They breed plants, Avi. So 1966 is when it was first released, and it peaked in the 80s. It became very popular, and pretty much every classic cask ale, bitters were made with some portion of Maris Otter. Right. But then it almost became extinct in the 90s, like in 1990, 1992, because the I think it's called the NIAB, National Institute of Agricultural Botany, basically struck it off its list and said it has low yield, it's susceptible to various diseases, and it almost died completely until a couple of stalwarts came by, and they said, hey, we want to buy the rights to this and make it ours and basically save it. So it's kind of odd that it had such a following that someone wanted to save it, but at the same time, it was not being planted enough to survive. It wasn't marketable anymore. Right. So basically, what happened was the people who bought it, they said, we're going to take the best seeds, and they planted it. And over a course of several years, they created this mother field in North Norfolk, and it was like the breeding ground and the selection ground from which they kept picking the best and most vibrant and most characteristic versions of the seeds and planting it until they had somewhere between 4 and 5 acres of what they considered acceptable or malt for its class to be considered Maris Otter. And the people who bought it were H. Banham and Robin Appel. So those two got together and created a consortium, and they still control it strongly to this day. And they think that it pretty much thrives and gets most of its character from the fact that it's grown in this maritime environment in the I guess it's kind of central England as far as north to south goes, but it's on the east coast.
So you mentioned the age of this malt it's not very old, and my understanding is we're talking like 1960s, 1970s, right?
Yeah, so 1966 is when it was released, and so it's considered an heirloom variety, right? An heirloom to me, I think like 19th century. I'm thinking old.
Yeah.
But it's not really that old. It was bred in the 60s from 2 other popular malts of the time, and that's kind of how it goes. As they're continuously breeding malt, they find out, this one's becoming susceptible to like leaf rust or fusarium or some other disease. Yeah. Or they're always trying to grow for agronomics, meaning yield. Yeah. Extract, how much sugar, low nitrogen, low protein, but not too low because you still want body and foam and creaminess, Yeah. So it's always a balance, and every time you shift towards one, you're removing the other. So if you want more protein for foam, you're obviously going to decrease extract, starch, and then thus sugars. But you can't go too low because enzymes are a protein, Right. So what happens is, every 10 years, and a long-standing malt would be 20 years. Well, somewhere around the 30-year mark, not quite 30-year mark, because I say it came out in 1966, somewhere around the 90s, it started waning off and came off the recommended list. Well, that's 30 years. That's a long time. And then it got revitalized, and then in the late 90s, it became revered and popular again. And so now it 50 years was like 2015, 2016. Yeah. 50 years for a malt is ancient. That's a long time.
Yeah, it is an old heirloom malt at that point, right?
And what's funny is even if you go look in a lot of descriptions for malts, the first things they talk about are what I just talked about, the agronomics. They talk about its protein. They talk about its disease resistance, its yield, how long it has dormancy. Does it come out of dormancy easy for malting purposes? Usually not until the last sentence or so do you get to flavor. Yeah. It's really a shame. But with Maris Otter, it's the opposite. One of the first things they talk about is its homogeneity. So it's very kernel to kernel or plant to plant. It's very much the same, which makes it a consistent performer in the brew house.
Right.
But then you start going into this rich, nutty, round, sweet, biscuity flavor.
Yeah.
And that almost every descriptor, if you go internet search Maris Otter, it's going to talk about traditional English flavor.
Oh, yeah.
Round, sweet. You know, it's amazing.
Yeah, you just described what my brain says is Maris Otter, but just those few words: round, sweet, nutty, a little bit toasty. Absolutely, with a kind of a biscuit thing. One of the before we get into talking about all of those characteristics, the agronomic side of things sounds a lot to me like hops, and it makes sense. They're both a plant that we're growing up and utilizing not only for their flavor impact, but they have to be able to withstand certain conditions and whatnot. And it sounds, I think of Maris Otter, by the way, if I didn't say it in the first segment, is one of my favorite go-to base malts. And it is a base malt. Some people get that confused, and you see them adding like a half a pound with a whole bunch of 2-row. You can do that, but you can also use it 100% for your base malt. It's sort of makes me think of hops like Citra, this crazy good hop that got all of this popularity, and it. In the end, it's sort of this I don't want to, minimize the hard work that people who out there who are doing hop research or even malt research, what they're up to, but it's sort of happy accident. You know what I mean? You're experimenting and you're trying these things. And next thing you know, you've got this great, hop, or you got this great malt. And there's just something kind of neat about that to me.
There's stories about that in malt. Like go read the, Oxford Companion to malt and look up some of the old varieties. There's a story of one. I might get it mixed up. It doesn't matter. But I think it was Chevalier. Like a farmer was walking by another farmer's field and said, "Can I have some of that?"
It doesn't surprise
and
me.
he started growing it. So that happens. People. What was the story of which hop was it that was found? Was it Amarillo?
I think Amarillo was, it just kind of a happy accident,
Yeah, someone found it in the field and then they trademarked it. And so there's not many, I guess it's happening more now, but up until like Simcoe, there wasn't many trademarked cultivars or breeds of hops. Well, Maris Otter is one of those malt examples. It's one of so Maris Otter is a cultivar. It is 2-row. It is a winter variety.
Right.
So it is grown. Well, it's planted in the autumn and then harvested in early spring, whereas a spring variety would be planted in early spring and cultivated or harvested in late summer, midsummer, like July. So it is a 2-row. So when someone says Maris Otter, it's a 2-row. But often what we say is we just say, I'm using 2-row.
Yeah.
We don't say, I'm using Metcalf.
Yeah.
Or I'm using
Chevalier or whatever
Chevalier
it might be.
Meredith or Expedition. They don't often mention the type of barley, which I think is a shame because they're different. But often what happens is by the time malt gets to us, the most important thing was that it was economically and agronomically viable. And then by the time they go, oh, this can be grown, by the time it gets to the point where they say, should we grow it? Now we're talking about flavor, and performance in the brew house. So that's just kind of the nature of a lot of these things. It obviously has to be disease resistant. It has to get yield. Maris Otter almost yields half of what some of the more typical widely grown 2-row varieties get.
But it's grown because of its quality. I mean, that people want it so bad, and because of what it's known to impart into beer, it makes it worth growing still. Then, right? I mean,
that's exactly it. You consider a farmer or a malt grower 1.5 to 2 tons per acre compared to 4 tons.
Yeah,
I mean, and it's not twice the cost. It's about 30 to 40% more.
Yeah.
So, that's a premium.
Yeah.
You obviously have to be invested in that flavor. You want that character.
Yeah, well, and people who brew with MO and who really like it, like myself, we're kind of used to paying a bit more for a sack of quality Maris Otter, than for a typical sack of Pale Two Row. So, like you said, it is a premium. One of the more interesting things about Maris Otter is its name. I don't know how much you know about the history of how it got its name. I've heard some rumors that I think are kind of curious.
I don't know the Otter part, but Maris is the street name of the old Plant Breeding Institute.
Yeah.
So it was on Maris Lane.
I believe it's in Trumpington of village, something like that.
Trumpington, England. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and so which is just right outside of Cambridge. The Otter part comes from a naming convention where they were tagging plants with. My understanding is, as they're going through this experimentation, and this went not just for malt, that they were adding names of different animals at the end of it.
Oh, funny.
Yeah, so they had Maris Otter.
It's like the grain version of Geranimals,
something like that. So they had things like Maris Mink, Maris Puma, Maris Otter, and they were going kind of the way we name hurricanes in alphabetical order. So pretty interesting. I'm not sure exactly how accurate that is, but it's something that I've heard. Yeah,
I say we go with it. Plus, otters are super cute.
Oh, so cute. I know, man. But the malt's not terribly cute. At least it does taste good. Do you have any information on some of the more vital statistics, diastatic power, the type of color it imparts as well?
Well, it's kilned somewhere around 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, mind you, hotter, warmer than some traditional pale malt. So that is obviously going to get more Maillard Browning reactions.
Yeah, right.
And you create more Maillard Browning precursors, and then Maillard Browning, which then begets melanoidins. So that toasty, nutty character is not an accident. That is part of the kilning process, and as a result of that, as you get warmer, you sacrifice enzymes. As the moisture goes down, I'm sorry, when you're at somewhere around like the 15% moisture range, enzymes are more susceptible as moisture is increased.
Right.
So a lot of times what they do is they kiln with lower moisture. So in order to get these Maillard Browning reactions, they leave a little moisture and they kiln a little warmer. And what happens is you destroy some enzymes. So the diastatic power is slightly lower. And it's going to depend if you do Lintner or if you do Kolbach. But diastatic power is like 140 to 228. And the Lintner is like 50 to 75. Now, that's about 3/4 of that compared to traditional pale ale malt.
Yeah.
So, but that's plenty. I mean, it's plenty. It's a base malt. You
Yeah.
know? The reason why paler malts needed are people were making more enzymatically hot malts was because a lot of American brewers were using adjuncts.
Right.
And they obviously weren't bringing enzymes to the party. And a lot of grain is used for malting, distilling. So all they care about is making sugars.
Yeah.
Not all, but primarily they want this malt to convert quickly and efficiently.
Yeah.
So they want enzymatically rich. So they're sacrificing flavor for enzymatic power and extract.
So in a side-by-side, in regards specifically to the diastatic power, the conversion efficiency, in essence, of Maris Otter, if you're comparing it next to, say, just a standard pale two-row, what might we expect to see? That Maris Otter is not gonna have as high of a, pound for pound being identical. Maris Otter may not have as high of a OG as standard pale two-row.
Well, you would think that it doesn't have as much extract potential per a stat sheet,
right?
But really, in my experience, it comes right in. It's within a few, gravity points are a half degree Plato.
Yeah,
it's really close. What I have found is that it doesn't seem to attenuate quite as well.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, though, right? Because
no. Especially with English beers, right? You want some of that character. So really, what I've found is, for the similar beer, you might be 2 gravity points, a half degree Plato lower with standard two-row versus Maris Otter.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's kind of been my experience, though. There have been those times where I don't know if I'd even notice a difference if I was brewing side by side with a domestic pale malt or whatever. One of the more difficult things when it comes to the flavor and aroma characteristics of malts, one of the difficult things in my mind to parse out is how much of the character contribution is from the barley variety versus how much of it is from the kilning. And then, of course, you've got the whole aspect of both together, the whole gestalt of this malt. So what do we know about, you mentioned that the kilning, this is just kind of a rabbit hole that I've found myself going down in before when thinking about malt, particularly base malt, is, you mentioned how the Maris Otter tends to be kilned 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, which is like, I don't know, 5 to 7 degrees Celsius warmer than other base malts or pale two-row base malts. To what extent is that what is responsible for the flavor difference that people describe with Maris Otter?
Yeah, I don't know if it's purely kilning technique. Otherwise, you could just take another variety and kiln it the same, right?
Which is what people have done. I mean, you've got. I know that I've used a lot of Great Western has their I think they call it Northwestern pale malt, which is sort of their version using a different species of barley. Yeah. But their version of a Maris Otter type, I believe, Maris Otter type malt because of the kilning difference.
Yeah, I don't know how much of it is purely variety, how much of it is the floor malting technique. Because, Simpson's, for example, has floor malted and non-floor malted Maris Otter.
And people swear that has makes a difference in the ultimate character that malt, imparts to beer.
Yeah, and I think Crisp has like number 19, which is Glen Eagles, which is floor malted, and then they have a standard Maris Otter cultivar that's not floor malted, from what I understand. Hey, just as a correction, I was given the British, the German equivalent for diastatic power for Maris Otter. It's actually somewhere in the 70s range.
Okay,
so it's about half of what standard like a Caprice malt would be.
Yeah,
140.
Which again, I mean, that's it's interesting and but not necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, it's still fairly hot malt, and anyone who's ever used Maris Otter as a 100%,
Oh, it converts.
Totally
especially
converts.
If you do a standard 60-minute mash, it's going to convert.
Yeah, you might have to hold it a little bit longer or whatever, but it's still going to convert and do its thing. So, I mean, I think anyone who's been in brewing for longer than about 4 weeks is aware of what Maris Otter is intended to impart. You described it as kind of that typical English character. To me, that's toasty, nutty, bready, and in the aroma is where you get it a lot. I mean, in my experience, again, very anecdotal, what I get when I'm doing high percentage Maris Otter beers is that aren't terribly, overly hopped, is I get kind of this baked, toasted biscuit type of character in the nose.
Yeah, I like biscuit. One of the things I've noticed, especially if I get like a fresh bag, hasn't been sitting at a home brew shop for decades. You get a fresh bag right from like More Beer or someone like that. You put your nose in a bag of Maris Otter. To me, it smells like peanuts, like just slightly roasted peanuts. Now, it's not fully nutty like peanut butter.
Right.
It's just like the actual shelled peanuts.
That is amazing that you're saying that, because I was serving an Irish red ale that I made just yesterday to some friends. I'll be writing up this article soon, so stay tuned. And I shared it with a nice big group of friends, and one of the descriptors that we all picked up on, very pleasant peanut-like character.
Yeah,
and this beer is like 80% or more actually of Simpson's Maris Otter. So there you have it.
There you go. Yeah, I think that peanutty character with a little bit of some darker roast, like a pale English chocolate, whatever, is just amazing.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah,
I could just drink pints and pints and pints of it.
Absolutely. Another aspect to look at when it comes to the characteristics imparted by malt is mouthfeel. I'm not sure of the protein content in Maris Otter as compared to two-row, other standard pale malts.
Yeah, it's right in there. It's it was coveted for its lower protein, because English beers, traditionally drop quite clear, and they had the tradition of running malt or running ales, so they had to clear rather quickly.
Yeah.
So it's somewhere in the 8 to less than 10% protein. So it's right in there with Halcyon, another that's a winter variety 2-row as well. Those are selected for their lower protein.
Yeah.
So it's a lower protein malt.
Well, so outside of English ales, which obviously, there's this whole movement. I guess a lot of people talk. It's not really a movement, but people talk about if you're going to make, a regional style, you really ought to use the ingredients that were available or that are from that region. I don't think there's any question that using Maris Otter for a bitter or a mild, you're probably going to get, at the very least, you're going to get some of that character that you would expect in a quality version from that region.
Yeah, I think so. Is it because people in that? It's probably because people in that region tend to use that ingredient, so we associate with it. A quick example of that is 11 of the last 15 winners for the. They call it Supreme Beer Champion, which is an awesome name, by the way. Supreme. In England, it's a camera competition.
Right.
And 11 of the last 15 winners have used MO in their recipe. Now, do they do it because judges expect it? Do they do it because it's great? Is it a little bit of both? I don't know. But that is something of note. And so obviously, if you're having a cask ale or a low gravity bitter, but you still want full flavor, traditional English brewers think it matters in some way.
Yeah,
right?
and I mean, anecdotally, I made an American Pale Ale. I have a recipe, I believe it's on the website, called Smiling Sky. It was a collaboration recipe with a friend of mine from years and years ago. And I believe the first version we made was with domestic 2-row, and it came out fantastic. We loved it. And we had the idea to just swap the 2-row out, the pale malt out with, a high quality English, I think it was crisp Maris Otter. And this wasn't a side-by-side. We're going to talk about your experiment later. But in our, very subjective impressions of the new beer, it had a much richer malt character, like a noticeably richer malt character, fuller mouthfeel, which I thought was pretty interesting. These are the notes that I wrote on this beer from, I think it was 7 years ago now. But then the other thing that I thought was curious, I wonder if you have any thoughts on this, is that the hop character seemed slightly muted. And I wondered if that just wasn't because of the balance of, I know people hate that word, but I'm talking about, you up the malt character and on a kind of those are kind of correlated, right? So the higher the malt character gets, perhaps the less hop character, at least noticeable hop character is there.
Yeah, I would say that's it goes into the perceived bitterness conversation. So instead of it being perceived bitterness versus analytical, you might have the same amount of hops, but because there's more malt character and more malt aroma, I would say that's probably what happened. Because the other one was louder, the other one seemed relatively muted.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of you hear about, reason I bring up that pale ale anecdote is because a lot of people, at least a lot of folks that I've talked to, swear by, even here in America, swear by using a nice, rich base malt like Maris Otter to really provide that kind of malty backbone to their super hoppy beers. In fact, the very first New England IPA I ever made was, I think, 85% or 80% Maris Otter and then flaked oats, and that's it. And it was
uncommon.
It was pretty good. Yeah, it's not uncommon. So, do you have any thoughts on using this richer? I mean, obviously, it might have origins in the UK, but that doesn't mean it just has to be used for English ales.
No, absolutely not. I think that's exactly what you use it for. It's a tool in your toolbox. So if you want to make your beer stand out. So one of the things I learned in competitions years ago was you could make two beers and they could be, say, equally, air quotations, good. These two beers are very good. So subjectively, people would say, this is a fantastic beer. This is a fantastic beer. But if 4 or 5 other brewers are making a beer similar to yours using, say, Breeze 2-row, and notice, again, I did not mention the cultivar. So you're using, some other brand, Viking or whatever, 2-row, and then all of a sudden you come along and you use Maris Otter. It's just a little bit different. And being a little bit different catches the attention of this judge. And, he or she goes, wow, they think it's better, and it's not better. It's just because you could be equally skilled brewers.
Oh, sure.
So now you have a slightly different character. So I think it's something you can use to make your beer a little bit different compared to other people. Now, I do think it's better, but that's an opinion. I just like that character. I like that nutty maltiness. Yeah. So if I'm aiming for that, I would use it. But if I also want it to be a little bit different, you can layer in malts like Mecca Great Estates, right? They have all these malts that are so different. So I think just adding a little bit of that, 10-15% will make your beer have more character. Yeah. A different character. Same thing with Golden Promise, another cultivar. That's a different malt. To me, I consider that like Maris Otter Light. Yeah. So you can just layer in these things. You don't have to do a complete swap out. You can just do like half, take your base malt and divide it in half, and use Maris Otter and then 2-row or, generic 2-row, or Maris Otter and Pils malt, are, it's basically, building and layering flavors.
Yeah. One of the interesting things I heard somebody say about Maris Otter one time was that it's one of those malts that can make your homebrew taste less homebrewy. And there's a lot of opinions out there as to what that, quote unquote homebrew flavor is. But I have to agree, there's an element, there's aspects of Maris Otter that just refines beer, in my experience. Now, I have not done personally a side-by-side. Malcolm, you have, and we're going to talk about that experiment as soon as we're back from this short break.
Hi, I'm Stephen Leach, creator of Brow Supply Brewing Systems, here to tell you about our latest Unibrow brewing system. Modeled after the brew-in-a-bag method, the Unibrow uses the same kettle for both mashing and boiling, replacing the fabric bag with a stainless basket that can hold up to 20 pounds of grain. A heating element is run by an electric controller that allows for the maintenance of specific mash temperatures and makes mashing easier than ever. Each Unibrow is shipped with a counterflow chiller and the parts required to brew a batch of beer. We're really proud of the Unibrow, and we know you'll love it as much as we do. Go check it out at browsupply.com and sign up for our email list to receive special deals in your inbox.
Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer, and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. When compared to standard pale 2-row malt, many claim that Maris Otter imparts a richer, biscuit-like character that leaves a beer with a perceptibly fuller flavor, a claim that you, Malcolm, put to the test.
That's right. So I, having some English heritage, always thought maybe I liked Maris Otter more because of the harken back to where I was
your
born.
Biological bias.
Yeah. my father's lineage, etc. And I wanted to see, especially when I got more and more involved in this group and talking about bias and things that influence your opinions, could I really tell, and could others really tell Maris Otter from a standard 2-row non-marked cultivar? You know, so if you every home brewer, you order from your online store, or hopefully you go into your local homebrew shop, you say, give me 2-row, and you don't even ask it by brand name. They just give you a bag of magical 2-row,
right?
And you brew with it. So I wanted to see if it really mattered, especially at the premium, the cost, you know, being 30 to 40% more in most cases.
Yeah.
So, and what better beer to do that than an ESB? So we used Great Western Malting Company's 2-row, premium 2-row, by the way, and I think I had Thomas Fawcett Maris Otter, and that was the reason why I used Thomas Fawcett in this case was because the person who I bought it from had just got a shipment. So, you know, I don't know where it spent its time in between, but I thought rather than go and buying a bag that was, you know, sitting somewhere for who knows how long, at least it had just come in.
Yeah.
You know? So that was my mentality there. And one of the things I've noticed, so this isn't a super low ABV beer. It was targeted around 5.5. But one of the things that the English tend to do is layer crystal malts into their lower ABV beers. So that's what I was going for here. I had Gold Swan Red Malt. It's Gold Swan, but it's red. I know. I can't figure it out either. Karistan Hugh Baird's. It's one of my favorite malts. It's one of those things I started using a lot when I was doing competition because not a lot of American homebrewers in competition were using it. So
I've never used it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's just slightly different, you know, and I mentioned that in the previous segment. It's just slightly different.
Yeah. Just enough to be noticeable, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then caramel 120, that's kind of double downing on the red malt in OY because 120 does tend to give some red character.
Sure.
And then special roast, which is a character I like a lot, and especially lower ABV beers and English beers in particular. Now, someone might say, what the hell? You added... 4, 2, so that's 6 or 7% crystal malts. I am obfuscating the variable here, right? I am.
People will say that. People did
Yes.
say that, but let's be real. You were at 91.5% pale malt,
right.
either Maris Otter or this domestic 2-row. So I'm not too worried about the haters there.
Okay, I used EKG for EKG and a little bit of Magnum to lower the total hop need at 60 minutes for bittering. So Magnum obviously high alpha and EKG, and I still wonder how much the bittering hop characteristic comes all the way through the boil, but. Yeah. This is English. I went for EKG. And then Styrian Golding. You know, Styrian is actually a Slovenian hop. I think it's Slovenia.
I think so, yeah.
And it's by way of Fuggles, though. So it's Fuggles grown somewhere else in Slovenia. But great hop, and it's actually used quite a bit in some British beers. I like it a lot. And then West Yorkshire 1469, which is the West Yorkshire Ale from Y Yeast. This beer was just gorgeous. I mean, it had this. I mean, come on, man! Look at the pictures. Go check out the experiment and look at the color in this beer. It's just this.
I know you're excited to talk about how gorgeous this beer is. Let's talk some stats, though, real quick. You mashed this beer at 155 degrees Fahrenheit, 68 degrees Celsius for about 60 minutes, and you did measure the mash pH. I was kind of interested in that, just given the fact that you were using two different malts. Mash pH was almost identical, right? I mean, I think it was 0.01 pH difference.
Yeah, exactly. It's within noise, you know.
Yeah.
Taking a pH measurement 5 minutes apart will change the pH with a couple tenths or a couple hundredths. So yeah,
right.
More or less identical.
And then the same thing kind of goes for the OG. I sort of expected the MO, if anything, to be maybe slightly lower in OG than the Pale 2-row, but it came back 1056 versus the domestic pale malt at 1055 OG. Again, just noise. That could be due to some other, process variable.
I consider that the same.
Right.
And what I was a bit more surprised was the finishing. So 1.015 are 1015 for Maris Otter and 1014 for 2-row.
Yeah.
My experience has been more often not, as talked about in the second segment, was the MO will tend to be slightly less attenuative. But didn't come out to be in this case.
Yeah. No, I would say that's, I mean, based on the one specific gravity point difference in OG, that's almost identical. I believe that is identical attenuation. So, and these were both fermented at 66 degrees Fahrenheit or 19C for about a week, and then you ramped them up to 70F just to make sure that they were going to encourage that attenuation. Yep. Looks like you cold crashed fine with gelatin, which, hey, you want more haters? There you go.
I didn't have isinglass, which I would have rather have done.
You also didn't rack them to a firkin, so
yeah.
But you did keg them and force carbonated each to the same level, and then let them condition for about a week before you were serving them to tasters. And then now we can talk about how pretty this beer was, Malcolm. That seemed to be the your favorite part.
I like glassware and I like presentation. It's no secret.
You do.
Yeah, but I was just really happy with that. Like mahogany color.
They're gorgeous, man. Yeah.
And crystal clear. You can see the future through these beers.
So when I'm looking at the photos, I don't see much of a difference in appearance at all. From your eyes, if you can remember, I know this was a couple years ago now, but did you recall the beers, looking any different or having, a difference in foam stand or anything like that?
No, I really didn't. I would have thought that the Maris Otter would have been slightly darker.
Likewise, yeah.
Because as a rule, pale ale, like American pale ale, is like around 1.8 Lovabond, and Maris Otter is often, depending on who makes it and what the maltster does to it and the kilning process, but it starts anywhere from 2.2 to 3.
Yeah.
And then up to 3 to 4 for some, like I think, Crisp and Simpsons are a little bit different, and so is Thomas Fawcett and Hubert's.
Sure.
But almost twice, if you want to consider that, almost twice as dark, in the Lovabond scale on the low end. But I think because of all the crystal malts, that overtook the show, so.
Yeah. And I can see that, even if there is a slight difference in the base malt color contribution, that once you start layering in all those darker crystal malts, and again, it was only 8.5% total, I think, of the specialty malts. You start to layer that in, and those colors start to get, any difference.
A long way.
Yeah. But any difference is going to be less and less perceptible as you start to even out all of the other malts that you're adding in. So that part, I guess, doesn't surprise me too much.
I think if you were to make like a golden ale or a simple smash beer, you might be able to tell a little more.
Right, exactly, right. Yeah. And if they were, if it's 100% MO versus 100% two-row, which, we can do that, and I'm sure we will get to that at some point, there might be a more perceptible difference. But based on I'm looking at the picture right now, they look pretty doggone identical to me. So before we talk about your actual experiment results, what were these beers like for you when you were trying the triangle tests?
I was able to tell. So they were different. It just seemed like one was more lightly bready, with that then characteristic caramel malt on top of it, but underneath was just a lightly bready, almost crust character, which is typical of domestic two-row.
Yeah,
that bread crust oyster cracker. And then quite prominently, even upon smell with the Maris Otter, I got that biscuit, richer, fuller, nutty character. And when I'm teaching sensory classes, I'll tell people you can't smell sweet, but you can get the impression of sweetness.
Absolutely.
And that's what I got. I by smelling them, I thought to myself, this one is going to be sweeter.
The best. It's such a weird thing because fuller is such a terrible descriptor for aroma and flavor, in my opinion. Now I get fullness, meaning that it's just got this. There's no emptiness in flavor, and you start to get into this weird realm of linguistics where it still doesn't make sense. The best description I have of my anecdotal experience with Maris Otter is that from the very beginning, as you're lifting that pint up to your face, the aroma just smells very full. The malt character, and I don't. It's nutty, it's biscuity, it's malty. You do kind of get this impression that it's going to have a sort of pleasant sweetness to it that I just don't get with all other, with beers made with other malts.
It's the same thing though. If you go read descriptors from leading cellarmen and maltsters describing Maris Otter, which they just describe very romantically.
Sure.
and that's what I like about it, is that it does it does create this romance. They say things like round. What does that mean? They say things like fuller and creamy. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
How do you taste creamy? That's a mouthfeel perception. That could be something that's true, but usually that would be beta glucans and protein content.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's on the lower end. So I don't know what it is. It's consistent. I'm not sure if everyone's copying each other.
So it makes me think of I forget, I don't know if it was oatmeal or some other food like that. It might have been grits or something. But somebody was saying that they just add a drop of vanilla and it enhances the creamy texture of whatever this food was. I heard this a long time ago before Brulosophy was ever around. But it makes me think of that there's these characteristics that we associate with mouthfeel or flavor that even just upon smell, our brain just starts to say, all right, expect creamy, expect fill in the blank, and we find it because we're kind of looking for it at that point.
Yeah, there's a lot of experiments that show that. Same thing with adding color to a malt.
Absolutely,
people will start. But to get back to these beers, even though I sat there and just said, hey, this one was nuttier, this one was gave me the impression of sweetness. I made them sound much more different than they actually were. They were pretty close.
Sure.
And having tasted and having done many other experiments, I thought, well, this has a chance to not be significant because they weren't as starkly different as some other experiments that had failed to reach significant were.
Sure.
Or
that we perceive them to be at the very least. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. As we perceive them to be. But on these two, I was like, all right, yeah, they're different, but it's close, nutty versus biscuity versus cracker, whatever.
Right.
But I was surprised at the results as far as the degree to which people were able to tell.
Yeah.
So we served 2 samples of the domestic 2-row version in opaque cups and 1 sample of the Maris Otter, right? And we had how many people in all?
47 participants. A nice big sample size on this guy.
Yeah. So we would have needed 22 accurate selections for statistical significance. I'm not sure what the heck that, for some reason, that word statistical just catches me every time.
It's your English heritage, man.
Sure. It's something. It's, anyways. However, at this size, we had 25 make an accurate selection, meaning they were reliably able to distinguish a beer made from Maris Otter from one made with domestic 2-row.
Yeah, and 25, people who don't understand the way triangle tests work, basically what we're looking for is just enough over 1/3 to say that it's probably more likely that the variable at play is the reason for people being able to identify the odd beer out than it is chance, random guessing. In this case, 53% of the tasters, 25 out of 47, identified the Maris Otter beer or distinguished it from the beer made with domestic 2-row, which says that, we can say with some confidence that these beers were different. They were noticeably perceptibly different, which means in many ways it sort of validates our anecdote, our subjective feelings about this malt.
Well, yeah, but one of my favorite parts is the preference.
Here we go.
And so one of the things I like about these experiments is we don't say what the beer is. So they're not judging it based on, they're not poisoned or biased, influenced with, should this be English? We just said, do you like it? We just say, do you like it? Which one do you prefer?
Yeah.
Right? It was split 10 and 10.
Right down the middle. Yep.
Right down the middle of those. So obviously we had 25 who selected the unique beer out, but 10 chose Maris Otter, 10 liked domestic 2-row, and 4 felt there was no difference, and 1 noticed a difference but had no preference.
Yeah, so they liked both or disliked both equally, which is, we see that pretty often. The whole preference thing is always really, to me, that's kind of the pulling the covers off, right? Like, hey, check it out. Yeah, these beers might have been different, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the impact of the variable, whatever that might be, made for a better or a worse beer. It just made them different, and that's all it is.
I was surprised that 10 people who chose the domestic 2-row were wrong. Their opinion is wrong.
Of course. I actually don't disagree with you on that. I think I like Maris Otter better too. But
wow, okay.
At the very least, what we can say is that from based on this experiment, this single experiment with a single beer, it does seem that Maris Otter imparts a unique character compared to domestic pale Two-row, it may not be terribly vast, and I would have to, reckon that you could get away with, I think we all have gotten away with making English styles without Maris Otter, but you may want to give it a shot. I think, at the very least, again, these results would suggest that we can, it's going to have a unique or impart a unique character to your beer. Now, we did get a whole bunch of reader comments on this, but before we get to those, Malcolm, what are your plans in terms of using Maris Otter for different styles based on the results from this experiment?
I continue to use it for English beers, and occasionally to add a nuanced different layers of flavor for American styles. So if I do an American IPA, I may use, at least half of the base malt might be Maris Otter and sometimes Golden Promise,
sure,
depending on where I'm trying to steer this beer.
Yep, I'm in the same boat. I've been using a lot of Mecca grade estate malt lately, and their domestic two-row, their pale variety. I think it's Pelton. Pelton or Lamont. I always mix those two up, but it has a very, in my experience, a lot of the same characteristics that I expect or that I get from Maris Otter. So, and you've got a lot of these small craft maltsters coming out now, and their focus is on richer malt characters. So give those a shot. You probably have one local to you and don't even know it. Just give it a Google. So, all right, let's get to some reader comments here. Matthew Wirtz, he says, very interesting experiment. I've recently built a brewery in Europe, and this was a concern I had when sourcing ingredients. My brewery is U.S. My brewery uses U.S. RAR two-row. I don't think RAR is U.S. I think that's Canadian. And he says, I was looking for an equivalent profile here in Europe. His brewery in the United States uses RAR two-row, and he was looking for an equivalent profile in Europe. In the end, he went with extra pale Maris Otter. That's something that I don't have much experience with. It has the same color as domestic two-row, and I've been very happy with the results. I don't taste a significant difference in profile based on the few beers I've made so far.
Between the domestic, the extra pale?
Yeah, so he's using extra pale Maris Otter, and he was trying to match, it sounds like what he was doing was trying to match the characteristics of the beers he was making at his brewery in the U.S. using RAR two-row, which is a Canadian two-row.
Yeah, I guess it's a different malt, so
it sounds like he's getting similar results, though. Have you used this extra pale MO?
I don't think I have. I've seen it mentioned. I just saw when I was reviewing the winners of some of the cask ale competitions, there was one of them that had used it. I think it was Harvest Pale Blonde from Castle Rock. I think they used it. I could be wrong there, but there's a couple who do use it for lighter beer.
Yeah, I brought this comment in because I was just curious about extra pale Maris Otter. I've never used it. I don't know if I've used it.
That.
Yeah. I just, when I get Maris Otter, it's typically I'm asking, buying a sack of it either from the homebrew shop or from a professional brewing friend of mine. And so it's just the normal stuff. I've got Simpsons right now is what I've been using. So, interesting comment. I'm glad you're getting the results that you were looking for, Matthew. Next comment comes from Mike Delecki. He says, here's the thing. While I love when people start with that. While a greater than expected by chance number of tasters were able to identify the odd one out, the real results are this. Among those who were able, by chance or by taste, to distinguish between them, an equal number, all caps, of tasters chose the beer made with each type of malt. So it would appear MO makes a different tasting beer than two-row. However, which is better? Answer, no evidence here supports the idea that either is better. I prefer MO, but in no way do I claim it's better. I like the way it tastes better, but you might prefer two-row. If so, who is right? Well, me, of course. But when it comes to flavor, the only judge whose opinion matters is you. This sounds just like you, Malcolm.
This guy's a genius, by the way. No, yes is the response to that.
Yeah, no, I agree.
They are different, at least per our experiment, and preference is always is that it's subjective, and it could be to so many things. If you grew up in an environment in which you ate garlic all through your life, you like garlic, and so if you grew up on maltier English style beers, you probably are going to prefer, maltier style malts, such as Maris Otter. That is the whole crux of the preference portion. Different is one thing, preference is another.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things we didn't hit on and that our survey doesn't capture is the, we do this for other surveys, but the representativeness of style. So how close to a specific style is a beer. And it's entirely likely that if we were to ask people, all right, so this was a English special bitter, which one tastes more like an ESB? The one made with MO or the one made with Pale Two-Row. Maybe the one made with MO would, more people would say it tastes more classic, but
that was one of the most enlightening experiments was that very old versus fresher extract.
Right.
I don't remember the style of beer at this moment, but it might have been like a Pilsner or something. I think
like that. So, yeah.
But essentially, the preference on that was nearly split too, because I never told them it was a Pilsner. I just said, which one do you prefer? And what we found out was some people thought, well, no, this beer is like a nice Scottish light. I'm like, yeah, it's oxidized extract. So preference without
context, basically.
Yeah, without context is completely different. You know, just is it yummy? So people said, what do you prefer? Some people like the less malty, version of that ESB. And it's no secret that people drink a lot of lightly flavored beers in this country.
Yeah, no, they do.
So maybe a less intrusive, less bold, rounder, fuller, nuttier beer was preferable to them.
Yeah.
No surprise.
Nope, no surprise at all. Next comment comes from Oville, I guess. I've always been told use ingredients from the country whose style you're brewing, but that's not always possible depending where you live. It's been said 1,000 times already. Try it. You might like the results. If you don't, do it differently next time. I've stopped fretting about specific yeast type. Same with malts and hops. Taste is so subjective. Brew what you like. Your friends will still drink it if it's free and cold.
Yeah, I always say try anything twice, because in case the first time you screwed it up.
And just didn't know, yeah.
Yeah, another one of the very popular and a beer that performs very well in competition for professional brewers is St. Austell Proper Job. It's called a Cornish IPA. So use ingredients from the country that it's supposed to emulate. Well, Proper Job uses American hops.
Right.
It uses Maris Otter malt, but it wins awards in its country, the United Kingdom. For its 4.5% cask ale and its 5.5% bottle version. So, yes, you can use a little bit of one and a little bit of the other.
Absolutely. Here's a fun one. This comes from Growler Phil. He says, I've discovered that if I add a pinch of Munich and Vienna, maybe 3 to 5% of each grist, to make up the grist, to a base of U.S. domestic two-row pale malt, I can mimic a bit of the biscuit and nutty quality found in more expensive UK-based malts such as Maris Otter. This little trick works for my palate, at least. Is this something you've experimented or played around with, Malcolm?
I've tried it in various versions, and I think you can make a acceptable facsimile. I don't think it's exactly the same, but can you trick a lot of people? Probably. I've tried emulating, I think this is a common one, but emulating decoction mashing by using a little bit of melanoidin.
Right.
Things like that.
Yeah.
Now, I think basically someone would say, oh, this is fuller tasting, this is maltier tasting, so yes, I'm accepting it as, for example, British malt. Sure. I wonder... It'd be a fun experiment, seeing how close you can get.
Yeah.
But I don't think they're exactly the same in some of my experiments, but I'm sure I could be tricked by someone for sure.
Yeah, I went through a whole phase where I was trying to. This was back in my try to figure out craziest way to emulate different things without having 15 base malts on hand phase. And what I came up with was in 90, it was something like 93% domestic two-row pale malt, and then 7% victory malt. And it, to me, now I never did a side-by-side comparison, but to me that added just enough of that kind of biscuity, sweet, toastiness that I expect from a Maris Otter. I think, like you said, it'd be a fun one to compare, the emulate, because if you can just get away with buying cheap two-row and have a 25-pound bucket of victory on hand to emulate the MO character, I think that'd be pretty cool. So
I think you can get most of the way there. Like with victory, kind of always gives me this toasty dryness.
Yeah, yeah, likewise.
So I think Maris Otter has some of that, but I think you'd be missing the nutty aspect. So Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Fun to try, though. Reddit user Mr. Gigantic Brony says, I've read that the difference has a lot to do with the differences between American and British malting process rather than the different strains of barley. I'd like to see a comparison between a, quote, modern British variety and one made with Maris Otter.
Yeah, we talked about that in the beginning. Is it the floor malting? Is it the fact that it's grown, like I said, in that maritime environment, getting the sea breezes? Is it the kilning process? Is it a little bit of each? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, honestly, it's, again, just to repeat myself here, but it's really difficult when you're tasting a finished beer to delineate how much of the character is because of the species of barley versus the type of kilning versus how it was malted. All of these different things. What we know, or what we can deduce from this experiment, is that it's different at the very least, so. That is something that I'd be interested in as well. This was a domestic two-row, which is known for being kilned a little bit lighter than MO. But if we were to compare Maris Otter to, say, Great Western's Northwestern Pale Malt, or one of the other pale malts pale ale malts, as opposed to just a pale two-row malt, maybe it would bring that delta a little bit closer.
Yeah, we did a experiment in our club, Three Rivers Alliance of Serious Homebrewers. We made like an ordinary bitter with, I think, 4 or 5 different suppliers of Maris Otter. So we had Thomas Fawcett, Hugh Baird, Simpsons, and Crisp, etc. And we served them to people. And, I can't say every single one was different, but as a group, there were differences.
Yeah, sure.
I can't say you would take beer A and beer C and you'd be able to do a blind triangle. But at the time, we were serving to people, and people were giving us their preference on which one they liked, which one they didn't like. And
sure.
It wasn't overwhelmingly one was preferred. They were just different.
Yeah. I think that's what we're going to, we see that often with the experiments, and, when we ask preference, that part's just so subjective. Well, our final comment comes from Brian Cavins. He left it on Facebook. He says, I've used both in my recipes and have had similar findings. Two-row tends to be cleaner feeling, tends to have a cleaner feeling with light cracker breadiness. Maris Otter tends to be a tiny bit sweeter and a shade darker, lending itself well to European styles.
Yeah, I agree with that. It does seem to be a little bit of a bolder background.
Yeah. A somewhat, I would say, if we're going to go back to circling all the way back to the original analogy of malt being the canvas, this is going to be a canvas that maybe has more of a cream tint to it than just stark white. Well, that's all the time we've got for this episode. Malcolm, do you have anything else on Maris Otter before we get going?
Yeah, I do. We often talk about hops, and then we talk about the name of the hop, and sometimes we say where it's from. So we'll say, this is a Pac Northwest hop, and this one's a citrusy, and it's Citra, so it's a name, a breed or cultivar of hop. We don't often do that with malt, and I think we should more often. And if you go to the Oxford Companion to Beer, it talks a lot about, you can look up different varieties of malt, okay? Halcyon, Pearl, Triumph, Pipkin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what's interesting to me is if you go look up malt itself, it describes malt and malting, the evolution of the plant itself and the process, and it talks about breeds and cultivars in a generic sense. And at the end, it mentions that by and large, we don't talk about cultivars. We usually talk about brewhouse performance and its agronomics.
Stats.
But, yes, but in the Oxford Companion to Beer, it does mention one variety, Maris Otter. It talks about its flavor and how it's different in that regard and its longevity. So that is telling. There's a romance and a history to that particular malt, and it should be celebrated.
Amen, man. And if you haven't used Maris Otter yet, go out and get you some, give it a shot, see what you think for yourself. My hunch is that you're probably gonna like it. Well, don't forget to head over to brewlosophy.com to read up on the experiment we discussed in this episode, as well as everything else that we're up to. The Brulosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brulosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brulosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brulosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.